injuries can really change the landscape of fantasy football, because once the starter goes down, it's next man up. And what's this next man going to do? When the backup starts producing, what do we do from there? Is it an instant pickup, or is it a guy that we let sit there on the waiver wire because we know the starter's coming back? Is his role going to increase? We saw this last night with Isaiah Likely against the Buccaneers, with Mark Andrews being out with an injury. He led the team, catching 6 balls for 77 yards and 1 touchdown. This is off of 7 targets, with a team leading 20.6% target share off 64 air yards. That owned a 30.9% share of the team's passing air yards. So when he was in, he was the guy. He was the tight end they were going for. He was pretty much Mark Andrews' handcuff. And that's very interesting to see, because that is something you just don't have ever. Like ever. A handcuff tight end. And that's just something that is weird, and you don't normally see every season. Is a backup tight end that you know that when the starter goes down, you have a good feeling. We kind of saw this in the preseason. We saw him heating up, and we were wondering what was going to happen. Now Mark Andrews goes down for a little bit. Isaiah Likely just steps in and gets the workload. A lot of workload, a lot of opportunity. We have to see what's going to happen going forward, but this could mean an increased role for him. Does this mean we need to get him in fantasy? Well, looking prior to this game, he was averaging 11.3% target share, a 35.1% route participation rate. He's only had like 10 catches on the season, caught 6 more last night. So around about 60% of his production came last night. With Andrews out of the fold, things get very interesting with him. With Rashad Bateman nursing his foot injury right now, things are interesting because targets got to flow somewhere. You have to remember, when Mark Andrews is healthy, he commands about a 30% target share, and there's some games he's in the 40 to 50% target share range. He is a big cog in the offense, but Isaiah Likely might get more targets going forward. We don't know for sure. We don't know what's going to be happening with Mark Andrews on the long term. It's reported that it is a shoulder strain and it's not serious, but we don't know if that's going to be the next game, next 2 games. We don't know how serious, and we have to just wait and see. We've heard our reports, and more news is going to come within the next few days. I guarantee that. Rashad Bateman being out of the lineup and him being in and out also creates an effect here. Isaiah Likely could have a bump of targets come his way through the back half of the season. That might happen. We don't know. It's a speculation thing. And with Mark Andrews now being volatile, and we don't know if he's going to be in the lineup or not, or if he's going to start getting banged up. Is he a guy to roster? He's going to be a hard guy to roster in basic redraft leagues. I see people trying to drop basic running backs to pick up trendy handcuff running backs or flyers or stashes, and it's hard to do for that. It's going to be hard to do that for a backup tight end. If you can, if you're in a deeper league, yes, it's probably a good idea, especially if you got Mark Andrews, but I don't see it happening for many fantasy gamers if they're in a basic 12-man redraft league. They got so many spots, and you can only roster so many tight ends. Usually I recommend rostering just one tight end and just streaming if something happens, especially for the bye weeks, and then going from there. You only got so many bench spots and so many flyers you can have. Maybe if you want to see what happens to Mark Andrews in his next game, if he's going to be in or not, or what the snap rates are going to look like, maybe pick him up for the short term if you want to look into that, but that's on you. That's not a recommendation from me. It's very volatile to what is going on with your fantasy team, what's going on in your league, what do you want to do. One thing I do want to mention is if you do pick up Likely and you're saying, screw it, I'm going to put him in lineups, or screw it, I'm going to see what happens. The difference between like a tight end 25 and a tight end 12, which is considered a tight end 1 for the week, is usually like 5 fantasy points, if not less than that. So the difference between a back end tight end 1 and a tight end that is considered like tight end 25 to tight end 30 isn't that much different. So if you do miss out or you swing and miss on likely here, there's no real loss because there's not much difference between that and a tight end who's scoring 12th for the week or 11th or 10th. The difference is not much. So really, even if you put him in your lineups and say he gets 2 targets, catches 1 ball for 30 yards or something like that, you get 4 fantasy points, that is not going to be far off from the tight end 12 who might score 8 to 10 fantasy points if you look at it that way. So it's not going to break you if you want to swing for that. I don't really recommend it in basic shallow bench leagues. But if you want to stash him just because we see what Mark Andrews does, we don't know if, say, Mark Andrews is proclaimed healthy, he comes back in the game, and then re-injures himself or whatever, and then it's likely next man up, and it's going to be for a few weeks, then you're going to want to have him on your roster. Maybe your team's horrible, and the back end of your bench, you got some spots to burn. Maybe you could do that. But he is an interesting player, as in if something happens to Andrews, the production, the workload's going to ramp up, and going forward, he might earn more targets and earn more production, and he might be valuable than some of the starting tight ends in the league. But really, this is on you and what you want to do. You know your roster. You know who you can drop and who you can add. Things are getting thin right now due to bye weeks, due to injuries. Running backs and wide receivers are getting tougher and tougher by the week. So proclaiming to get a second tight end is not really a fundamentally sound thing to do. However, picking up speculation plays for the back end of your roster is something you may want to think about doing just in case they hit. So those are considered gambles for the back end of your roster. If you want to gamble on him, go ahead. I don't mind gambling on a speculation play if you think they're going to hit, if you think the workload's going to increase, which it could if something happens to Andrews or if his injury gets worse or whatever happens. You have that as an insurance policy that if that happens, that likely could blow up, get more workload, get more opportunity. If that's something you're into, go ahead and do it. Fundamentally, though, really shouldn't be stacking up on tight ends. But if this is something you want to do just as a speculation, maybe just for a couple weeks, and you know what? If Andrews is back in the fold, looking healthy, doing his thing, I'll just drop him, move on to the next speculation piece. Go ahead. There is a lot of fantasy gamers who use their last roster spot as just a player they burn through, hoping that player catches fire, and if not, they drop him, get the next trendy guy, and they just keep it moving. I'm not against doing that as long as you identify him as that type of asset and not an asset that you're banking on hitting going forward, that you bank on him as a speculation. That's very understandable. But I do like him as a player. I liked him in the preseason, and I just want to watch things going forward with him. If something happens to Andrews, there's going to be a big buzz about him on the waiver wire. There probably is going to be this week. He's probably going to be one of the top waiver wire claims because of the production. People chase production. But overall, over the large spectrum of things here, considering how wonky the Ravens offense is, considering Mark Andrews owning a 30 to 40% share of the targets, it's going to be hard for him to step out the boundaries. For the tight end position, though, overall, from a macro standpoint, it's not hard for a tight end to stand out among these jabronis of tight ends. So you can make a case that they could field 2 productive tight ends in this roster, maybe scale back a little bit of Andrews, and likely get a little bit more, because we could see that and likely has proven that he could be productive and he could be useful. So you may want to look at him at that standpoint. So it's whatever you want to do. You know your roster, you know your wide receivers, you know your running backs, you know your bench spot, you know what's on the waivers right now, and you know what you can handle. Look at all that as a whole and then make your decision. That's if you're even interested in rostering a second tight end. Fundamentally, rostering second tight ends, not the greatest thing to do, but this might be the case where you pick up a tight end that could break out as a tight end 1 later on down the road or even soon. But let me know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button. Really helps the video in the algorithm. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I'm dropping all kinds of content, trying to help you out with the waiver wire, trying to help you out with your process and everything else. It's only going to make you a better fantasy player going forward. But I want to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.